Good afternoon, ALF Church. The topic for today's sermon is the God of miracles, and the verse that we will be looking into is Psalm 46, verse 10, the first part of the verse. Psalm 46, verse 10, and it reads, Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God. How do we get to know a God of miracles? Through just being still? This verse means stop fearing, acknowledge who your God is, be in awe of your Creator. Be still. It is the same words that Jesus says to the wind and the waves in Mark chapter 4, verse 39. The wind and the sea completely died down in silence, in awe and worship of the Creator. God commands stillness and silence. But have you wondered why it is so important for the people of God? This is because the people of God are prone to fear. And that is why be still is a constant reminder of who their God is. We will be looking at verse 10 in two separate contexts. First, be still is a command from God to the enemies of God. Bible scholars say the psalm may have been composed after David defeated the enemies of ancient Israel. So, this command, be still, is written in the context of a time of trouble and war, and hence we will be looking at this verse in the same context. The meaning in this psalm lends itself more to cease striving or stop, or more specifically, God telling the devil, stop fighting with my people. Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 12 reads, For our fight is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, and against spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Bring this picture to your mind. Jesus at the center, protecting his children, and the devil right in front. In this context, the setting is like a battlefield. And Psalm 46 verse 10 emphasizes that God enters the battlefield of the raging nations and defeats them just by his voice. Be still is a royal command of the King of Kings, and by just that command, he brings desolations upon his opponents. It is God entering the war and claiming victory by the power of his voice. Many times we have a tendency to sand off the sharp edges of God and make him feel very soft. But Psalm 46 verse 10 is a reminder that our heavenly King rules and he conquers. Children of God need to remember the Lord rules and he is a conquering King. He is the King of kings and the Lord of lords. He is so great that the strongest nations will be defeated by just his mere voice. The second context of this verse is a gentle reminder to the people of God, especially during these times when we deal with massive change, navigating the unexpected, and facing the unknowns. We are left stressed and anxious, and this is exactly where God reminds his people, be still and know that he is God. The instruction to be still in Hebrew means to let go or stop striving. It gives us a picture of loosening our grip on the circumstances and the outcome, both of which we do not have a control over. The call here is for a total surrender. Let us all admit that many a times we are fixers. We want things to happen as in how we plan it to be. But this verse reminds us to give total control and to depend wholly on God. The four things that I learned through this verse to be still. First is worship. Second, prayer. Third is remembering God's faithfulness, which brings us to the fourth point of giving thanks in all circumstances. We will look at each of these points separately. Worship. Psalm 46 is a song of praise, beginning with verse 1 reading, God is a refuge and strength, an ever present help in trouble. Worship reaffirms that God is on the throne and in total control. Worship ushers us into the presence of God, where we find total comfort and strength. In worship, we become less, and the things of this world grow dim as God is exalted. Now, I'm going to look through the lyrics of a few familiar songs that we sing in church. Many a times we just go with the music, but here I want to emphasize on the lyrics. The first song, I raise a hallelujah in the presence of my enemies. I raise a hallelujah louder than the unbelief. I raise a hallelujah. My weapon is a melody. I raise a hallelujah. Heaven comes to fight for me. I'm going to sing in the middle of the storm. Louder and louder, you're going to hear my praises roar. Up from the ashes, hope will arise. Death is defeated. The King is alive. Another familiar song, Sovereign, and the verse reads, your plans are still to prosper. You have not forgotten us. You're with us in the fire and the flood. You're faithful forever, perfect in love. You are sovereign over us. And the bridge is such a meaningful verse. Even what the enemy means for evil, you turn it for our good. You turn it for our good and for your glory. Even in the valley, you are faithful. You're working for our good. You're working for our good and for your glory. There's nothing that our God can't do. There's not a mountain that he can't move because he is the waymaker, the miracle worker, the promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. The weapon may be formed, but it will not prosper. When the darkness falls, it will not prevail. Because the God I serve knows only how to triumph. My God will never fail. These are just the lyrics of some very meaningful songs, and this is exactly what ushers us into worship. into the presence of God. The second point is prayer. When our hearts are stilled, we have time to pray deeply. And if we look at the Gospels, Jesus modeled this throughout his early ministry, often getting up while it was still dark and going off alone to pray. Luke chapter 5, verse 16 reads, Jesus often withdrew to the wilderness for prayer. The third point, remembering God's record of faithfulness. We serve a very faithful God. And Psalm 46, verse 8 reads, come and see what the Lord has done. Remembering can be done in two ways. First, by getting into the Word, where we are reminded of God's character, His miracles, His provisions. And secondly, we remember what God has done for us personally. God has not gotten us thus far just to drop us off now. Which brings us to our fourth point, gratitude, a heart of thanksgiving. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 verse 18 reads, give thanks to God in all circumstances. When we begin to have a heart full of gratitude, we see God's goodness all around us. That God is tenderly caring for us. And every delay or every setback, He will accomplish a perfect plan through it. And the most important thing that we need to remember that while we are still, God is still at work. Though we may not see what God is doing, we can be very certain that God is working through every circumstance to accomplish His desires. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop. You never stop working. You never stop. You never stop working. Be still and know that I'm God. This is a verse that has touched me personally and our family, and I would like to link this to a testimony from our life. Just about a year ago, Alicia was expecting our miracle, our second baby. And around this time last year, she was in her third week of pregnancy. And October 25th was a Friday. We attended worship at the hall and we went back. As usual, we are having a lunch with a family. And at around 4 o'clock, Alicia just got up to go to the washroom. And suddenly she comes out telling that she can feel something wrong. She could feel a water leak. We totally didn't know what to do. We went downstairs to the auntie who works in the maternity department, and she asked us to rush to the hospital. We were totally clueless and nervous, but thank God that at that time, Chechi and Rosalie were at home to take care of Ruel. So me and Alicia, we just rushed off to the hospital. And as we all know, the government hospitals over here on a Friday, they are less staff, very relaxed. But even in that moment, we could see God's hand of provision. He prepared a sister over there who's a close friend of my mom. And from then on, she was like a God sent angel. She took care of every detail. She rushed Alicia to the labor room. I was asked to wait outside because males are not allowed inside. And after some time, like at around 8 o'clock, she told me that I can go home and that if there was anything, she would let me know. All the tests were done, and thank God, baby was fine. Alicia was also fine. But we were totally shaken. We didn't know what was what to expect. It just amplified our fears. But even in that moment, Psalm 46 verse 10 came to my mind, which said, "Be still and know that I am God." At around 1:30 early morning, Alicia was brought from the labor room to the ward, and the doctor said she would have to stay there till the baby comes out, which could be a month or 2 months or more than that, which was totally not what we were expecting, but we just trusted in God. I used to visit Alicia for the next 9 to 10 days in the evening, and many a times it felt like nothing of this was in our control, but then God reminded us that nothing could ever be in our control. Psalm 46 verse 10 again was a constant reminder to us, "Be still and know that I am God." On the ninth day of Alicia's hospital stay, Ajishashan and Ishana went to visit her, and just as Ajishashan was about to pray, he said that he could feel like the devil was trying to snatch our happiness or trying to make a chaos. And he prayed so strongly by rebuking the devil. And this is exactly the first context of which I was talking. God telling the enemy, "Be still, for I am God." And in that moment, as Ajahn prayed and left, there was a calm over Alicia, and she was ready to give birth to the baby anytime, whether it was early or later. And then the big surprise comes at around 12:30 midnight, November 4th. Alicia begins to feel contractions. They quickly alert the doctor. Alicia is wheeled to the labor room, and they say she's dilated. And as unbelievable as it may sound, at 2:40 a.m. November 4th, Jessie was born into this world. The biblical meaning of Jessie is God's gracious gift, while in Hebrew it means Jehovah exists. Both were proved right at her birth. As you all know, Jessie was born much earlier than her date, and hence the next 1 month or so, Alicia and me were making constant travels to the NICU. Alicia was discharged the very next day. Again, fear started coming into our minds whether our baby was okay, whether she was crying, whether the nurses were taking care of her. And even as we left that hospital without our baby, this verse kept ringing in our minds, "Be still and know that He is God." Over the next many days, I kept visiting the hospital very regularly because I had to take milk for Jessie in the morning and in the evening. And my work also involved visiting hospitals, so it was very taxing. A day full in and out of hospitals. And we were beginning to kind of lose our hope. We were beginning to think how long this ordeal would continue. But we just began to worship. Many a times it was broken hallelujahs. Many a times it was just a melody that we had. Many a times it was just tears. But in the following days, We began to see God's miracle in Jessie's life. She started putting on weight, though it took a little longer than we expected. We waited patiently on God. We raised our hallelujahs. We began to sing to the Waymaker, the miracle worker, the promise keeper. And it's amazing how, in our weakest moments, God shows forth His strength. And just in about a month or so, Alicia's parents arrived in Kuwait. And within 2 days of their arrival, Jessie was discharged and she was home with us. The grandparents were able to enjoy with their grandchild at home. My parents, Papa and Mummy, were also able to come to Kuwait. And then Corona happened, and as we all know, we went into a total lockdown. And exactly like how our hearts desired to be 24 hours with Jessie, Alicia was allowed to work from home for about 5 or 6 months. None of this was what we had asked for, but God's ways are miraculous. We just need to be still and know that He is God. Indeed, He is a waymaker, miracle worker, and a promise keeper. May God bless us all with this word.